transform your career, business, life, and relationships. This is the Growth to Freedom Show. Now, here is your host, Dan Kuschell.
Welcome to growthtofreedom.com. Are you ready to learn how to get more clarity, more confidence, more capabilities? We've got a special show for you today. In fact, how would you like to learn the strategies, the insider secrets to tear relationships down, break them apart? No, I'm just kidding, of course. Now, we're going to talk about how you can go and build healthy, productive relationships. Because you ever noticed that the people who seem to have the most in life are incredible at being able to bridge and grow relationship capital, right? In fact, many of them treat the most important asset they have as their relationships when done right, not only personally, but professionally, at home, and in business, and in life. And that's what today's show is about. Our special guest today is Dr. Cristy Lopez. If you're new, Dr. Lopez has been a regular expert and guest on the show. She's been on Dr. Phil, been on Downsizing. She's a psychologist, a counselor, and a coach. She helps people in transition, whether it's their life, business, or relationship. She's a good friend of the show. Welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. So our show, by the way, is brought to you by doneforyousolutions.com. Go check them out. If you want to join us on Twitter, a lot of chatter going on Twitter, and a lot of that having to do with you. All these hashtags and all these social media things you're doing.
Yeah.
So join us on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. You can hit us up at Dan_Kuschell. That's Dan_Kuschell, or email us at info@growthtofreedom.com, info@growthtofreedom.com. And what's your Twitter handle, by the way? How can people reach you and catch up?
It's pretty simple. At Cristy Lopez, PhD.
At Cristy Lopez, PhD.
No, H in my Cristy.
There you go. So hit us up on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you as well. We've got a special resource package we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, so stay tuned for that. So let's dive into it. We're going to talk about relationships. Dr. Lopez and I were preparing before the show. We were talking about the book, Blink, right, by Malcolm Gladwell. It's basically thin slicing. How do you cut right to the core? We're going to do our best to be able to do that. Dr. John Gottman was featured in the book talking about the Love Lab. How would you like to have your own Love Lab? So we're going to bring you the Love Lab today, right in your house, right in your living room, right in your car, wherever you might be joining us. By the way, thanks for making us part of your day. So let's dive into it.
Yeah, you actually can carry your Love Lab around with you.
That's right. So we're going to show you how to keep it in your pocket.
Yes.
And bring it to the forefront. That's what we're all about here on the show, is
yes.
bringing you value. So speaking of that, Dr. Lopez, why don't we dive into it? Where do you see that most people fail in relationships?
Well, okay, maybe a little biased because of what, people come to me oftentimes because they are having problems or difficulties or struggles. But they do, humans are humans, so they tend to have the same kind of difficulties and struggles. And then again, like Dr. Gottman he's done research on like tens of thousands of couples for, at this point, probably over 40 years. There is a lot that we know about what makes couples be able to succeed, and he actually calls those masters at relationships, and then what destroys them, and he calls those like the disasters of relationships. So the disasters...
well, speaking of those, I've been both of those. Frankly, I know you can't talk about that type of thing, but I can. Right. Have you ever been felt like you were a master of relationships and then also a disaster? As a kid, I was shy, quiet, introverted. I was the kid in school that would be standing on, except in sport. I was very vocal in sports, had a lot of leadership quality in sports, things of that nature. But outside of that, I was very uncomfortable, frankly. But if you ask people, what was Dan like? They go, oh, he's a super nice guy, right? Super nice. But I wasn't the type that would spark relationships. And I see all types of levels of people. Some people are great at sparking that initial first impression, but boy, they don't carry a deep one. But I see a lot of people who confuse that ability to spark or ignite relationships, right? And they think that is a relationship. Right.
That's
and what a lot of this has to do with is our past. It has to do with our parents, our upbringing, probably how we see our family, our mom and dads, integrate with each other or show affection or love.
Don't.
And or our grandparents, right?
Yeah.
And so essentially we become, the old saying is we become who we hang around most of the time. So speak to that as it relates to the foundation or the core of the culture of relationship building.
Yeah, that is usually the case. So whenever anybody comes, a lot of times it may seem like, that doesn't seem to make sense, or it's not rational, or it's not logical. So I always say things may not seem to make logical sense, but they pretty much always mean psychological sense. Okay, so when couples are presenting their issues and their struggles, then when you get into what you're talking about, like then when you find out their relationship history, and not only like romantic relationship history, but back to their family of origin, it all makes sense. like things like fall into place. So when I hear somebody's story in the present, I actually probably already have a pretty good idea of what their past was like.
Yep.
And pretty much that is what ends up being the case, because that is how you learn. When you are growing up, this is the job of parents, is to teach your children all kinds of life skills so they could be successful and independent in the future in many ways. But nobody really teaches parents or anybody these skills. So hopefully, they're doing the best that they can. And then hopefully the next generation carries it forward and does the best that they can and keep carrying it forward.
Yeah, and think about that. When's the last time you had a relationship class, right? We had the 4 R's in school, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were brought up in this education system. We had the 4 R's. Mm-hmm. And by the way, do those 4 R's make any sense? Reading, writing. Okay, that's not an R.
Arithmetic, yeah.
Arithmetic.
Oh, yeah, the 3.
Or I guess it's the 3
yeah,
R's.
3.
I had the 4.
We can add a 4.
I'm going to add the 4th one, which was rhyme and reason.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, so the 3 R's, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reading, writing, and arithmetic, but 2 of them don't start with R's.
Yeah.
But that's our foundation for education.
Right.
But we never had, classes on money,
Right.
which is pretty important
Exactly.
today. Relationships.
Right.
So I think even let's go deeper to the core.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're going off the cuff here. What is a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think part of the issue is we've never sat down, not everyone, but most
Mm-hmm.
people don't sit down and actually define what is a what does it mean?
Yeah.
What is a as you're watching right now, as you're listening, what is a relationship for you, right? And what does it mean? Now, a simple definition, I think, as I've read in, as you shared this last night, I went and looked it up. A relationship is being in relations, right?
Yeah, the definition is
I'm pretty
yes,
smart.
yes.
So it's being in a relation with someone. So
Yes.
that means you're coming together in
Right.
relation.
Uh-huh.
And what is the word when you're not in relationship? Is that called breakup
Well,
or
it's
tear
like
down or disaster?
disengagement or disconnection.
Disconnection.
Because when it comes to relationships, okay, there's a lot of things, but I always talk about it in kind of like 2 main areas. And the part that's really like a relationship is connection.
So let's speak to that, because this is the biggest lie
Yes.
for relationships
Yeah.
or feeling in relations with
Right.
people in the world today. And I'm not going to name the brand, it doesn't matter, but technology.
Right.
Technology
Yeah.
is the greatest false sense of intimacy, false sense of
Right.
relation, false sense of love. All social media, I won't name names, because it gives people a sense that they are in relation when in fact they're incredibly Have you ever felt that way, disconnected instead of connected? Well, today we want to talk about getting back to the core of what's most important, getting in relation truly with yourself, A, B, with
Yes.
others,
Yes.
and then how to have a healthy relationship, and also how to know what the signs are of what tears down
Right.
relationships, right?
Yeah, people tend to be good at that part.
Really good at that part.
Yeah.
Really good. We've got a lot more practice at that than we do of being in relations, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it's from the way that they grew up, and that there is what we just were talking about. There really is no kind of manual that says, hey, guess what? Look what we discovered, human nature-wise, by studying relationships on what helps. So for some reason, kind of human nature is very, it's not some reason, it's evolution. So, people, the whole thing is like to live, okay, to survive. That's different than surviving in like a most healthy and the most best way that you can, because really when it comes down to it, it's like, hey, how can I stay alive another day? And if that means I have to be defensive or offensive, or I have to do things that maybe won't be so conducive to connection and bonding, but it makes me live, that's where your brain wants to go first.
Yes, go first. And you know what? I found myself there too. At times, I find myself getting very defensive.
Right. Most people.
And I'm not afraid to share that openly with the world here today. But guess what? There's a solution. Number one, the first step starts with a raised level of awareness, which I've
Yes.
heard you talk a lot
Yes.
about. And if you're finding yourself where you're on the defensive more or offensive because you feel you have to put that fight or flight syndrome in place and go on the
Yeah.
attack, right?
Yeah.
Or you just don't feel at ease. Today, we're going to talk about some of that. I'm going to share and expose some of my dirty laundry, if you will, about defensiveness to give you an idea of how you can overcome this.
Yeah.
And the first step starts by telling the truth. I've heard Dan Sullivan, if I've heard him say it once, I've heard it say it 100 times. The first step starts with telling the truth.
Yeah, you have to be aware and then know how to accurately identify what's going on, which is like telling the truth. And physiology, we've talked about these things before, physiology is huge on this. Physiology is underlying emotional states, and that physiology influences your behavior. And if your physiology is hyped up in the fight or flight thing, you're not going to end up, it's not going to go well.
Yes.
It's not going to go
So you have
well.
to be very aware. Like, my energy level is constantly on high. We'll just say high level.
Yeah, but if it's high and it's positive and it's supporting and it's like positive, then that actually can add.
Yep.
But yeah, if it's like charged to the point of possibly overwhelming and then kind of maybe interrupting what you're trying to do and or what another person is doing, okay, then, maybe you want to look at that.
We need to look at that. Do you need to look at that? Do you know someone, maybe not you, but maybe you know someone close to you that might need some help as far as building healthy relationships, understanding some of the signs of what's tearing them down, being able to be good to themselves, which will allow them to be good with others. Well, today that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about masters. We're going to talk about disasters. You talked about the idea of the 4 horsemen apocalypse.
Yeah, so Gottman pretty much discovered there are 4 main variables that destroy relationships, and so he kind of dubbed them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, because that is when he observes a couple within a very quick amount of time, and then once you
I don't think anybody would want to know what those things are.
Well, they would come in handy because you can see it within a very quick snippet of having a couple talk. You can see the variables or the elements that are present in their relationship. And then through his research, statistically, I forgot what it was, but it's like he can predict when who's going to divorce and approximately when, like with a 90-some% accuracy. Like it's really high. And you can see it because you can, and not only do you see it, but he also actually does hook people up to like physiological monitors, because again, a lot of this is physiological. So like when I'm seeing him in my office, you may appear like a partner may appear calm on the surface, but there's a lot of physiology going on. So this is why you got to be aware, because you got to be aware if your physiology is going on, because then you need to do something about it so you can be more effective. Because if you try to do anything like communicate or in that kind of a state when your physiology is on high and in the fight or flight, you're going to most likely do more damage than good. So really it's recommended to not try and continue a talk if you feel you're being physiologically hyped up.
And we want to help you have the breakthrough you deserve to have the best relationships, not only with yourself, but with others, whether that's at home, whether that's in business, in life, business and relationships. We're going to talk about the 4 horsemen apocalypse. We're going to talk about the 4 things that destroy that and a whole lot more. Dr. Cristy Lopez on growthtofreedom.com. Welcome back to growthtofreedom.com. Are you ready to get more clarity, confidence, and capabilities in your relationships? Well, today's show is going to show you how to do just that. Let's summarize the first segment of the show. We've been talking about some basic concepts of the difference between masters and disasters of relationships. We've been touching on the idea of why some people might be defensive or get offensive in the relationships. The 4 horsemen apocalypse from Dr. John Gottman in the book Blink, and the idea of thin slicing to really cut to the core of what makes it work. And so we left off with the idea that there are 4 core things that destroy relationships. So you know what? We're just going to dive right into it right now.
Yes. So, and what I was previously saying was when it comes to relationships, connection and bond is very important, and so is the communication, because that's how you're expressing and how you're developing connection and bond. So the way that most people communicate, these 4 variables that tend to destroy relationships are very prevalent. So I'm going to talk about the 4 in relation to communication, because they're all right there. So the way you start a conversation with someone, so like your partner, the way you start your conversation is going to highly predict how it's going to end up, meaning like a high conflict fight or a disengagement, or if it will actually be effective. But what most people do is they start off in the way that's going to predict it's going to go into something negative, and that is by criticizing. That's your first of the 4 is criticism. And they usually do that by saying you. And people tend to put very extreme statements on things, always, never. Then they tend to dig at the person's character or personality. So you never empty the trash, you're so unreliable. A lot of people will open with something like that. When you open with something like that, you are doing this, which is criticizing your partner. Criticism is the first of the 4. When you're being criticized, you usually want to do one of 2 things. So this person comes in and says this, and what do you usually want to do? You want to go, oh yeah? Well, you, blah, 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 right?
Yep.
That's defensiveness. So you're being defensive and not taking responsibility or trying to pretend or put off your, that you're innocent, you didn't do this thing, or you know what, it's not so bad because look what you did. So when people do that, they're being defensive. That's the second of the 4 things. So right there in an opening. So
criticism number 1.
Yeah,
and then defensiveness number 2.
Yeah. Now, sometimes people are to the point of, you know what, they're not even engaging anymore. So when this person says this, they're like, whatever. Like they back up, they disengage. It's like they are a stone wall. So it's like you are talking to a stone wall because they are not verbally communicating with you and not even non-verbally communicating anymore. They have just disconnected. Stonewalling is the 4th. Okay, so usually people will come in with a criticism. People will usually respond with either that defensiveness or the disengagement, the stonewalling thing. The third one...
What if someone deserves it?
Okay, well, I'd have to ask you what you mean by that. but let's just go on the idea that no matter what, you are in control of yourself.
Right.
And how do you want to conduct yourself? So the third one is contempt.
4th one.
The third one, because
Okay.
the first one is the criticism. The second one is defensiveness. The 4th one is stonewalling. But your third one is contempt. Now, contempt was actually relayed in that statement when it dug at the person's character. You never empty the trash. You're so unreliable. When it does that part, you're so unreliable, that's the part that's conveying contempt. And contempt is your other one. So you got criticism, defensiveness, contempt, or stonewalling. Those are the 4 variables that destroy relationships. Now, so I give people different worksheets to kind of assess all this. And every time I go over this, usually both people in the couple are always like, we got them all. And it's like, well, yeah, because most people do. It doesn't mean, though, you can't do anything about it. But you need to be aware because you need to bring down the things that are destroying your relationship while you build up the things that help and grow it and buffer it.
And, the idea, I mean, there's a couple things that pop out into mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's probably normal that people experience these at some level.
Yeah.
Overall in their relationships.
But there is a difference between experiencing it and then behaviorally acting
Always
on it.
doing it, yeah. So what happens is, the idea, for example, honey, I'll be faithful to you in our marriage for 30 days of every 31, right?
Okay.
So the idea that there's an acceptable level of intolerance there, or maybe intolerance isn't the right word, but that
you're going to make a mistake, a guaranteed mistake on that.
Yes. Yeah. So, it's like how much is an acceptable level of arsenic in the water?
Right.
Well, probably not any, unless you're here in Arizona. But that's another story, another day. But the idea that this happens, the key is to be aware of it,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And then it comes back to how do you respond to this?
Right.
We can react to it, overreact, or we can respond.
Yeah.
Right? So speak to that. If you are in a relationship where someone has a tendency to be highly critical, their contempt in their statement and their approach, which then leads to defensiveness. It started with defensiveness, but usually they're not going to recognize that they're even defensive in the first place, right?
Yeah.
But then that causes, like I find myself at times when I'm on high alert in a defensive type mode versus offensive, right? And frankly, I battle this sometimes. So speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so this is why if somebody is trying to work on their relationship, you really actually need the other person, both of you. Like both of you need to participate. So couples counseling, marital therapy, you need both people because you cannot control anyone else.
Right.
You can only control and do yourself. So hopefully the idea is partner A and partner B are both working on these things. Because you can talk with your partner about how you feel when your partner makes a statement that in your mind you're perceiving as being critical. It would also be helpful if your partner works on it themselves so that they're not so critical or they know how to alternatively bring something up versus doing it in a critical way. And what's
Right.
most important there is not whether you truly, like objectively are being critical, it's that your partner perceives it. That's what's important. Your partner perceives it that way.
And a lot of this too has to come, again, the person that might be delivering these 4 areas that you're talking about, a lot of that has to do with their upbringing, and then the person who is on the receiving end of it and how they deal with it, whether it's, reactive, responsive, overreactive, healthy, unhealthy, and all those areas, has to do with their upbringing.
Exactly.
Right?
That's why you have to work with each person, because that's the other part. Not only are you working with someone to help them on how they're communicating out, but how they're communicating internally. Because I always say this, your brain wants a story, and it'll usually make something up, and usually something that's worse or not true. So your brain's going like this, and then you're having these responses off of what came in, like the stimulus or what your partner said, but also what you're doing with the perception of it and what it means, and then you're reacting out of that. This is why, again, you got to be very aware and do your own work also.
And do your own work. Speaking of your own work, we want to help you move from overreaction or reaction to being able to respond in a healthy, effective, efficient way. Effective is doing things right. Efficient is doing the right things. And we're going to show you how to do both, how to take the 4 horsemen apocalypse here as it relates to relationships, the 4 things that tear down relationships. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to talk about the things you can do to offset these, the things that will empower you to provide more clarity, more confidence, more capabilities. Number 1, starting with you. Because again, as Dr. Lopez is saying, it starts with you, right? And being able, you're the only one that you can control, right? And this isn't about training you to be a better victim.
Right.
It's also about training you to just be better in relation with yourself, with others, in your life, business, and relationship. That and a whole lot more with Dr. Cristy Lopez here on growthtofreedom.com. Welcome back to growthtofreedom.com. Wow. Are you excited to learn how to have better relationships that not only spark but also last for a long time, that are healthy, productive, engaging, fun, enjoyable? Well, guess what? That's what we're talking about today with Dr. Cristy Lopez. And our video producer and director here, he had a great question at the break, and it made me think, because he said something along the lines of, does this apply not only in your personal relationship but also in business? And Dr. Lopez said what?
I said, yes, it does.
Yes, and it made me think, actually, there's a great movie coming out, and I've also read the biography, and there's a previous movie that created it in a different way, but the movie about Steve Jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so Steve Jobs, if you read the biography, I think it's Isaacson who wrote his bibliography or biography. I guess a biography is when you write it. But a
autobiography is you write it. Biography is someone else. Bibliography is more like references, and I think it's more like that. But anyway,
cool.
Go ahead.
And so he was known to be someone who was highly critical. Right? He was highly contemptuous. And I don't know the other things because I wasn't there, but at least the rumor, the portrayals seem to indicate that he had some of these traits. So it shows up in business. Either in extreme ways, right? Or little pieces of it. But you and I are going to have to deal with it, aren't we? I mean, that's life. We're all just jacked up, in my opinion. There's an old seminar speaker. He said, we're just all walking around with an umbilical cord wanting to plug it into someone, right? And follow. And so at the end of the day, when we're engaging or in relations or potential relation with so many different types of people, you're going to meet all kinds. And we're all kind of messed up in our own sort of way. And the whole point is, how do we make it productive? How do we make it fun, enjoyable, and have a match, right? So talk about that as it relates to business, how you navigate, or some recommendations to navigate that if you're in environments like this. Obviously, you have your source of income. If someone works for Steve Jobs, for example, right? These might be the highest level executives in the world, and they don't want to risk necessarily their stock options in a company by sabotaging the very thing that feeds them, their golden goose, if you will. So speak to that.
Okay, so it depends on the interaction between the two people. Because you could have somebody that says like, oh, but if I am this way, then that's how I get the best out of the person. Maybe not. Okay, because usually the person who hangs in there and deals with that, now we're kind of going to the thing about the making yourself a better victim. Usually that person has experienced that before. Like usually that person probably had highly critical parents or teachers or something where that's why they're able to kind of more hang in there with it, because they're familiar with it, and they're used to working under that kind of condition. And yeah, maybe they are able to do, relatively well or pretty well. It's going to come at a huge cost, though, because it's going to come at your physical health and your emotional health. But you may be able to produce a product. But there's the alternative of, if you had a different style, the person who was in charge, and you knew how to inspire, support, lift up, encourage, and help somebody progress, you may get their best stuff or even better stuff, and it won't be at the cost of their physical or mental health.
That's so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you see that every day, right? I mean, maybe where you work right now, maybe you're in a career, maybe, you're wondering, I've got this golden goose, if you will, and if I walk away, I may not be able to get something, but I'm just hanging in there. I can deal with it. I can make it happen. And, you've got to look. You got to weigh the pros and the cons. Yeah. What's the cost emotionally? What's the cost physically? What's the overall cost, in your life, mentally, physically, socially, emotionally, and financially, to determine what is the best for you. Isn't that right?
And people most often cannot produce their best under that situation, because you are being flooded with those chemicals again, because you are in a heightened state. And usually when you are flooded with chemicals like that and you are in a heightened state, you usually cannot do your best, because everything is going to that fight or flight thing again, which is, hey, I'm preparing to physically to do that. When you do that, it takes away your resources from your executive functionings that we want to have on board usually, which is your ability to make decisions, your ability to, even your ability to be open and creative and innovative, and all of the things that generally you think you would want from a employee. That stuff gets shut down, because that stuff's not going to survive, have me live in this battle I'm about to go to. So most people actually don't perform their best under that situation.
And we want to help you perform your very best. And I'm not saying that we're going to give you performance enhancement drugs.
Well, you can make them in your own mind, but
right. And we do, don't we? We actually do create our own performance enhancing drugs. So, you don't need the blue pill, right? You can self-indulge with your own self-performance enhancing drug to be able to go out and be your very best. And we're going to talk about how to be more open, more creative, more innovative as a result of positive relationships, some of the steps that you can take starting today to reward yourself, take good care of yourself, to provide greater clarity, confidence, capabilities, that and a whole lot more with Dr. Cristy Lopez on growthtofreedom.com. Welcome back to growthtofreedom.com. Boy, would you have loved to have been a fly on the wall at the break. We've been sharing some great conversation about relationships, quality relationships that provide the opportunity for more connection, more bonding, more clarity, more confidence. And when you're in the right relationship, I have found that when you're in the right relationship, everything actually seems to magnify in a good way. And when you're in the wrong one, there seems to be this counterproductive thing in those areas too, right? And one of the things that I think happens frequently, there's a big difference between a healthy relationship and a distant relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I think I personally have confused the two in my past, right, as it relates, because, Ramon, who's our producer here, brought up a great question, and it made me think of my own relationships in the past, where there's this idea that to be in a healthy relationship, you never argue, right? You never have confrontations, that you're just happy-go-lucky all the time, and that's just not true, is it?
Well, the thing is, because then people will say the other thing of well, I heard that it's not healthy if you don't argue. Okay, it's not that you have to argue with someone or your partner. The goal really is to try and have effective discussions, effective communication.
I like making up after an argument.
Well, you can still do that after you have your effective conversation, but now you're all pumped up from, doing a job well done. Okay. So that is really the goal, is to be able to have effective conversations, which also are still connections with your partner, because this is actually one of the highest predictors of couples being able to be successful, is that when they do experience a conflict, they are able to have a discussion around it where they are still connected to their partner and still have positive regard for their partner, still treat them with respect, empathy, all of these things. When you can do that in the midst of having a conflict, those are the masters. They're able to do that.
Yeah, and there almost seems to be this thing I've noticed with certain types of people that they have this scorecard, right, as it relates. They get in a confrontation or a conflict, and then, got to scratch them off the list, either in that moment or maybe even permanently.
Yeah.
It's a tit for tat type of thing. I know in Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, he even kind of alludes to it, givers, takers, and I forget the third one. They're like mediators, essentially. But essentially, speak to that a little bit, the idea of a checklist type relationship person, if you will.
When you do that tit for tat thing, that's actually a high predictor of divorce, of it not going well. That is not helpful to be having a scorecard and doing that kind of thing. So there's all these alternatives on what you're really doing is you are trying to continuously, as best you can, and the more that you can kind of build these skills up, you're continuously positively feeding your relationship versus going off and doing all of these other things. But you are human. Everybody's human. You are going to go off and you're going to do something not so advised way. And this is, so then there's actually like I think his ratio was 5-1. Like for every one negative that you receive from your partner, you need at least 5 positives to kind of even it out.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is why you really need to be constantly striving and doing the stuff on that.
I got a lot of making up to do, probably.
Perhaps. But you can do it. That's the good news, is you can work on all of this stuff. And there are things to do to help. So there's plenty of strategies, tips, and techniques for that.
So speaking of tips and techniques, we've talked, in my mind, we've been talking about the 4 sets of apocalyptic.
Yeah, the 4 horsemen.
The 4 horsemen. We've been talking, so those are the disasters. So let's talk about some of the things to create supportive, healthy, nurturing relationships overall. What are some tips or strategies you can walk away with today by listening? You don't touch that dial. You better hang out.
Okay, so first it goes to things we've talked about before, which is mindset. Okay, being aware and having a mindset. So I ask people, if you had to think of your brain as like real estate, you have 100% real estate in your brain, how much of that real estate, cognitive real estate, does your partner occupy? When I ask that question, I get a lot of like, ooh. And then a lot of surprise between the couples, because some people will say, oh, all the time, and others will say very little. Okay, so if your partner is very little considered in your brain, takes up very little of your cognitive real estate, you need to start working on it right there. Okay.
Yes.
So you need to start working on being aware yourself, your skills, be aware of your partner. Have the mindset that this is what you're doing. Like you have to decide. You have to know what it is you're trying to work towards.
In relation.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And then decide that you're going to do that. And then you can employ all these tips, these strategies.
And speaking of which, I found this in myself years ago, and I made the shift not only personally but in business, that I was looking for relationships to give me something.
Right.
And I shifted that and created that unconditional part of provide value or give first and give regardless.
Right. Yes.
And then if the relationship didn't match, you just naturally move on in your life. So speak to that a little bit, those who seek to receive first before they give.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that, after I went through my divorce, I also found myself a little bit more in a situation of being a little less reluctant to give fully of myself. And I'm sure you see that regularly. So speak to that whole idea.
So that's kind of the tit for tat thing.
Yep.
That's the waiting. This is what I always tell my couples. Okay, if you're going to wait and you're going to wait, what are you guys going to do?
Wait.
You're going to wait.
Yeah.
You're not going to move forward. No one's going to move forward. The whole idea is that you have to trust yourself and, at some point, trust that your partner is being sincere here and that they're wanting to work on it, because you, again, cannot control someone else, but you can control yourself. And really, it goes back to other things we've talked about, because how do you want to conduct yourself? How do you want to conduct your life? How do you want to conduct your business? How do you want to conduct your relationships? Because if somebody is doing something negative to you, do you want to be the person who then tries to come back at that? Or do you want to be a different person, which doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I accept abuse or take that, but maybe it means you don't allow that, or you're no longer in that environment. There's multiple other things you can do besides just engaging in that, and then because what's going to happen is you'll just go around in the same circle and be stuck.
And we want to help you get unstuck. So number one, it starts with mindset.
Yeah.
Right? So
you have to be in the mindset and decide that you're doing this, and you have to know what it looks like, and then have space in your brain, like make space in your brain, make it a priority to be aware of your partner and considerate of your partner, and be able to have these feelings, the sympathy, the empathy, the connection, the respect, like this kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to bring up a particular thing that happens between couples that is also a high predictor of success. Okay, so people generally are wanting to connect. People are social beings, and especially when you have a partner. And what happens a lot is it's called a bid. Like you're making a bid, you're turning towards your partner, and you're bidding for a connection. So you throw something out there. And that could be something as simple as, you both are in the living room. Like one person, has a newspaper, the other person's like on the internet. So let's say somebody's on the internet and they're like, hey, they get their partner's attention and they're like, look at this story or whatever. Like they say something like, oh, look at this funny dog or this whatever. Like they bring that up. That is actually a bid for connection. A lot of times people miss that completely. They may not even respond.
Yes.
Okay, if they don't respond, then the person takes that as a rejection. They're being ignored. Okay. Or say the other person's reading the paper and they hear this blah, blah, something about a dog, right? And they're like, they're upset because they're either
being interrupted.
Yeah, they're being interrupted or they're still holding on to a grudge from before or whatever. So when they hear this, whatever, something about a dog, then they respond actually in a hostile way. So now it's like, hey, I put a bid out there for connection, and not only like you either ignored it or you returned to me in a hostile way. Okay, that's even worse. Okay, people do that a lot. The thing that would be helpful, the thing that you're trying to strive for, is to be aware and be on the lookout for these turn towards or these bids. My partner is trying to connect with me. I'm going to turn towards my partner versus away or in a hostile way. So I'm going to turn towards in love and support and engage with my partner, and that's how you start your connection and your bond. So that happens so many times throughout the day, and so many times throughout the day, most people are getting met with rejection, that what ends up happening is they no longer put the bids out.
Yes, they
And
just
now
stop.
So you have two people kind of living parallel lives in disconnection.
Almost like roommates.
Yeah.
Instead of truly in connection or in relation or,
Yeah.
having a healthy relationship, right? And it's sad.
Yeah, it is very sad. It's very sad and it's very tragic because it doesn't have to be that way.
Yes.
You can work on it.
So we want to challenge you to look for the bids. Look for the bids, and you know what? Go give some bids.
Yeah.
That's as simple as it takes. Go out and give some bids today. Think of, your partner, your spouse, maybe some of the people you work with, some of your family, right? Your kids. In one of our recent episodes with Jim Shields at growthtofreedom.com/36, we talked about relationship with your kids. That apply. I mean, this all applies together, doesn't it?
Yeah, it works. And this is human relation. So business, partner, children, friends, colleagues. Anywhere where you're dealing with another human being.
And the more bids you put out, the more masterful you become. And we want to help you avoid disaster.
Right.
Now, this has been a fascinating conversation today. We could just go hours on this, can't we?
Yes.
And I would have a lot of fun doing it because, I feel like I just, share with the world all my, dirty laundry and pull the skeletons out and go, here it is.
Well, it is Halloween.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So now, by the way, how do people reach you if they want to learn more about your coaching, some of the things you're doing, your counseling, et cetera? So.
Yeah. Okay, so my phone number is 602-323-7824, 602-323-7824. I have a website, which is www.CristyLopezPhD.com. No H in my Cristy, so CristyLopezPhD.com.
So that's 602-323-7824, CristyLopezPhD.com. I'd encourage you to go visit Dr. Lopez, whether you're local, whether you're worldwide. She does, a lot of different types of coaching and services. She can go more into detail with you on that. But I've had the good fortune to know her for over 5 years. And we've become friends and having a blast with this show, making a difference, providing greater growth opportunities, opportunity for influence and impact. And, this has just been a fantastic show. What are a couple last-minute things you'd like to share? Wisdom, advice? What's something I should have asked you about relationships, bids, et cetera, healthy relationships that I didn't ask you or should have?
Well, actually,
I stay out of should, but anyway,
yeah.
I don't want to should on you.
Yeah, please don't.
Okay.
That's not advice to do that. There's actually a lot. There's so much more to say. So I'm just going to maybe add something from what we've talked about, which is we talked about communication and how the way you start a conversation highly predicts how it's going to end up. and we talked about the way to avoid and to not do. So then it's like, okay, well, alternatively, what do I do then? Because this is the thing. Whenever you're trying to take something down, like I'm trying to take these 4 things down, you need to build up the healthy in its place.
Yes.
Okay, so you need to know what to do. So in the beginning, a lot of people are like, okay, well, now I kind of see this because most people are having them. So I'm going to try and like stop doing that. But you need to learn what to do.
So instead of criticism, what would be the replacement?
So it's called a soft startup, or like a gentle startup. So it's learning how to bring something up with a partner without it being critical. So like if somebody came home late and didn't call to say, instead of responding with, oh my God, where the heck have you been? You're so unreliable. You didn't even let me know, blah, 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 which will go into an argument or a disconnection. You would say something more along the lines of, I'm so glad you're here. I was concerned when I didn't hear from you and you were late. I was afraid something may have happened to you. Okay, now
you know what? My wife is so much better at this than I am. She really is. Thank God for her.
Well, so maybe you can learn from her, because
I do.
If you heard that, more likely you're going to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry to have worried you. The battery ran out on my phone," or what. But see, now you're talking.
Right.
Whereas before, what was happening was the person waiting was making a story up in their brain, their mind. That's that whole thing, and they were going. So they reacted off of what's going on in their mind. So they need to do that work.
Back to mindset.
Yeah, so they need to do that work. And then, they would open that way, start and then that's when people get, again, stuck and go in the same circles.
Alternative to defensiveness.
Yes, so you want to open it up in a soft, gentle, respectful way.
So, by the way, we've run out of time.
Yes.
We could keep going on this for hours. I appreciate you being here. Thank you again. We'll do this, and we probably need to do a part 2 on relationships.
Probably.
What do you think?
There's a lot.
So there you have it. More clarity, more confidence, more capabilities around relationships. Take action with what Dr. Lopez has been sharing with you today. Go out and offer up more. What are they called?
Bids.
Bids.
Yeah.
Put out more bids. You got to get out more bids.
For connection.
Unconditionally. Look to what you can add value to, what you can give versus what you can get. Look at the alternatives to criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling, because there is a better way. Go out and put that in place. So I thank you for being with us. If this show's resonated with you in some small way, make sure to share it with your friends. We'll see you next time on growthtofreedom.com. Make it a great week and seize the day.